Hello and welcome to Eating for World Peace. This video will be looking at the wider role of the Syrian war and how Russia and NATO forces are sort of squaring off here. Here you can see a map of the Syrian civil war, and it gives a nice sort of overview of what's going on. In red are government and allied forces, in green are the rebel forces, in black are ISIL, and in yellow, which is hard to see around the north and the northwest, are the Kurdish forces. So as you can see, the majority of the population is actually to the west, in large cities near the coast. So the majority of the population is in government hands. So the large cities of Damascus are mostly in government-controlled, Hama and Homs too, Latakia, parts of Aleppo too. The north is generally controlled by the Kurds with some notable exceptions, and the south is generally controlled by rebels with some pockets of the government, as you can see. And to the east, along the river Euphrates, or the Furat as it's known in Arabic, are ISIL along Deir ez-Zor, Raqqa, and a little bit in the center of the country in Palmyra, but most of that's desert anyway. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So, if we look at the current situation, there is quite a lot of green on the map. However, there have been recent changes that mean that a lot of these rebel areas are no longer going to be supplied with weapons and ammunition coming in, and we'll go on to why that's happened. In fact, that only happened in the last few days recently, early 2016. So that's one aspect of what's happened, and also this video will go on to see what does this mean about the wider implications for Russian military power and so on. Anyway, let's keep looking at a little bit more detail here. So let's have a look at the ISIL and Kurdish areas in the east and the north. So in yellow you can see the Kurdish forces pretty much control much of the northern Turkey-Syrian border, and ISIL control a lot of the area, the desert area around near Iraq, but also all the way up to Raqqa and a little bit even into Aleppo province, around the Aleppo region. And they even have a little bit of the Turkish border at a place called Jarablus, is their major crossing there, and it sort of follows the river Euphrates along these somewhat major cities, but you can see little pockets of government resistance in Deir ez-Zor, and you can see Palmyra sort of at the bottom in the middle of the screen, which is quite a small place anyway. So that's the state of play in terms of ISIL. There's no major fighting going on in this I may be wrong there, but as far as I'm aware. Now moving to the south near Dara, so this is Jordan in the south, and to the sort of southwest in that stripy area and a bit further, that's Israel, and that stripy area of the Golan Heights, which were annexed by Israel from Syria. So it's a source of friction between them. You can see Damascus slightly further north, which has a large pocket of rebel forces there, but mainly controlled by the government, and it's the capital of the country. You can see a sort of line going through, almost splitting the two rebel areas. This is the major highway going from Damascus to Dara, which is the major city in the south and the name of the region. Syria is interesting. A lot of the cities give name to the region as well, if that makes sense. So Damascus region and city, Dara region and city, Aleppo region and city, Hama, Homs, Aleppo, Idlib as well. So it's, people use the terms interchangeably, but it can be the region or the city that is the capital of the region. Anyway, going a little bit further north, we have the string of major cities, Damascus, Homs and Hama. Again, almost completely in government control. And slightly to the east you can see Palmyra, where ISIL made some gains, but the government aren't really focusing their efforts there at the moment. They're focusing them more against rebel forces, and also ISIL forces in the north. They're just putting enough people there just to hold them off for now, from what I can see. So I think there was a truce in Homs recently, with rebel forces being allowed to leave with their weapons, and actually, as long as they agreed to leave. So that's another interesting development. And Homs is actually an area where some of the early, less violent protests started. So it's interesting to note that there still are sort of rebel factions there. Looking further north, on the coast here on the west is Latakia. This is a mainly Alawite region, although they have received a lot of refugees from all different groups of people, as Syria is a very multi-faith, multi-ethnicity country. And that's the president's Assad is from Latakia, as is his Alawite clan. This is also where the Rush Tartus is, where Russian naval base is, and Hamaim, I think, is somewhere in the Latakia region as well. So Latakia is a city, but also the region. So that's interesting. They have their airbase, and this is actually very important for the wider context of the war. There are some weapons and radar jamming equipment that have been deployed there recently that have completely changed the calculus of the warfare, and that makes it very interesting. So that's where a lot of the Russian aircraft are taking off from, and now you can see further in the northwest the Aleppo area, so the Aleppo city, which is that sort of green-red area where it says Aleppo, and the region is also called Aleppo. And to the north west is mainly Kurdish controlled, and then in the green are rebel areas, in black are ISIL, and in yellow are Kurds. So you have two Kurdish places in Aleppo with the Turkish border that are sort of cut between rebel and ISIL. There's no real government forces in the north, not many at all, with the Turkish border apart from near Latakia. So as you can see, Aleppo, the city, is pretty much surrounded. So parts of the city are held by rebels, but it's pretty much surrounded by government forces now. And in the north, ISIL and the rebels are fighting for control of that Turkish border. So if we zoom in a bit closer, you can see that major cities there, Hafir, Manbij and Al-Bab, are held by ISIL, and Jarablus in the north is a major transit point for oil, apparently, oil smuggling. So people say that there was a major highway going through there into Turkey, whether that's true or not. You can also see Kobani as well, which is where ISIL were before US airstrikes plus the YPG Kurdish forces really pushed them back. And they've pushed them all the way across the Euphrates to Tishrin. And interestingly, Erdogan said that if the Kurds cross the Euphrates, that was his red line, but they have already at the Tishrin Dam, so it's interesting to see what will happen there. So further to the west, you can see Azaz, which is the main transit point for weapons for the Green Rebels, so that will include elements of Al-Qaeda such as Al-Nusra, Ahrar al-Sham, Jaish al-Islam, all these other jihadi, and I don't know what they really believe or what they really want, but that's what they think. So you can see now, very interestingly, that where my cursor is near Nubal, there's a sort of red arc, and that's recently been captured by the government. So what does that mean? That essentially means that weapons from Azaz can no longer get into the city of Aleppo, but even more interestingly, they can't get towards Idlib, which is also that large patch of green near Aleppo that is also under rebel control, and that was actually part of the army of conquest known as Jaish al-Fatah. They are a rebel sort of conglomerate that conquered much of the Idlib area, including quite an important place called Jisr al-Sugur recently. So those three red dots near Nubal that cut the Azaz highway into Aleppo could be the thing that changes this war completely. It means that the rebels, at least on the non-ISIL rebels, cannot get resupplied. Whether or not they're better or worse than ISIL, again, I won't get into the morality of things, but those three red dots, which is a recent development, could be a big turning point in this war. Hopefully it will come to an end soon as well. Moving on, so let's look at the wider sort of implications. So this article in Voltaire.net talks about the USS Donald Cook, and essentially what happened is that in the Black Sea, which is a little pocket of sea that borders Turkey and Russia and a few other countries, the USS Donald Cook was sort of docked there near Romania, and essentially it had its brand new system known as the Aegis system, which is a way to sort of integrate all sort of communications data and radar data so that every single ship in the network would have access to information from other ships. So it's a very smart system. It's one of the latest systems that NATO had deployed, and they were very proud of it, and it was being tested there. And essentially an old Su-24 bomber with some weird thing attached underneath it flew nearby, and essentially it completely disabled the system and all their radar, so they couldn't know anything. And it's a device called a Hibini, as you can see. And after it triggered this device, the USS Donald Cook was essentially blind. It didn't have any radars or anything. And this is the brand new system, the Aegis, and it really spooked the people on board. Apparently, I don't know if any of this is true. This is just rumor, essentially, at this point. And then the Su-24 did simulated bombing runs, so it was completely unarmed, but it kept diving in 12 times to simulate what it would do if it would have attacked it, even though it had no weapons on board. So, as you can see here, in other words, the all-powerful Aegis system now hooked up, NATO's most modern thing, was shut down almost with a flip of a switch. So this would hugely demoralize the people on board, obviously. And there's even, So, if Russia has this ability, and I'm not sure that NATO has this ability to do this to Russian radar, that is incredibly important. It is because essentially NATO doctrine has been to have really sophisticated, smart, technologically superior weapons to Russia, who would count more on massed. I mean, traditionally, I don't know how much of this is even true, but sort of massed armor attacks and large scale stuff. So that's, if we can't see with our radars what's going on, and we can't communicate with each other because everything's jammed electronically, we have no edge over the Russian forces. So that's really, really worrying to NATO people, if this is true. Again, I stress this is true. So again, another article in The Independent by Kim Sengupta about how Israel and NATO are quite shocked at the sophistication of the Russian weapons that they've deployed into Syria. So, and also in Ukraine, apparently, in something, I mean, they say that Russia's engaged in hybrid warfare in Ukraine. That's probably true. I don't know. Again, I don't know these things. There will be people who do know this. So yes, you can see here they did their ballistic missiles from the Caspian Sea, which was 900 miles away, and in much like the Iraq shock and awe thing, I think that was what Putin was going for, to show that they had power to actually launch cruise missiles accurately. And more interestingly, there is talk, at least in this article, of the Hibini, or whatever it's called, radar and electronic jamming system being used, which is very, very interesting. Essentially, it means that a no-fly zone is no longer possible for NATO to force by military force, because at any point the Russians could just completely black out the area from radar. So you can see here it says that it becomes very, very difficult to access areas of Poland for NATO forces because of this ability to switch on and switch off radar at will. And that's to do with the Kaliningrad enclave, but that's a different matter completely. But the same principle, these things have a large radius of hundreds of kilometers, and they can just turn off the radar at will for NATO forces. That's pretty crazy if you think about it. And this really does possibly change the balance of power. And I think this is one of the reasons why there is a lot of uncertainty and fear going on, and why there will be ongoing problems and clashes between the two. Oh, it says it's the Krasuka 4 is the electronic warfare name of the thing in the Hemaim Russian airbase in Syria. So, this also has implications for, all sorts of tracking of missiles and things like that. So, it is fairly serious, and I hope this de-escalates too, because warfare is not good for anybody. Let's be honest. So that's what I think is going on. Also, I think this lessens the risk of a wider scale war happening, because you don't go into a war knowing that you're at a disadvantage. So I think it's less likely that anyone will want a war, obviously, and no one really does, because so neither side really wants a full-blown conflict, and no one in their right mind would want that anyway. So hopefully peace will prevail, and hopefully that there's less of this sort of outside forces, and the Syrian people will get a chance to really sort this out for themselves and have a more tolerant and more free society, hopefully. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.